Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Bismillahir Rahmanir Rahim, in the name of Allah, the most gracious, the most merciful. My beloved brothers and sisters, everything we do should be for the sake of Allah. Everything we do should be for the sake of Allah. If you read your salah, it should be for the sake of Allah. If you give out charity, it should be for the sake of Allah. The way you talk should be for the sake of Allah. The way you eat should be for the sake of Allah. The way you walk should be for the sake of Allah. The way you interact with one another should also be for the sake of Allah. We need to know this. As Muslims, everything we do should be for the sake of Allah. Everything. Absolutely everything. So people are surprised. How would eating be for the sake of Allah? Or how would interacting with one another be for the sake of Allah? Or how would sleeping be for the sake of Allah? Or how would walking also be for the sake of Allah? I would explain why everything should be for the sake of Allah. And in what way should everything be for the sake of Allah? قل إن كنتم تحبون الله فاتبعوني يحببكم الله ويغفر لكم ذنوبكم والله غفور رحيم. O Muhammad sallallahu alayhi wasallam, say to them, if they really love Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, if they claim to love Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, then follow me, and Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala would love you in return, and He would forgive your sins, for indeed He is most forgiving, most merciful. So if you are to follow the teachings of Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam, then you would realize that everything you do should be for the sake of Allah. Everything Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam did was for the sake of Allah. Everything, his teachings, if you are to follow each single teaching of his, you would realize that there is a way you would apply it, because everything he taught, definitely everything he taught, and you follow it and do it, it should be for the sake of Allah. He taught us everything we need to know as Muslims in terms of living a happy life, in terms of being a good person, in terms of being a responsible person, in terms of being a good Muslim, in terms of being a good father, a good son, a good mother, a good everything you can think of. So I said I'm going to explain how you're going to apply being or doing things for the sake of Allah in terms of eating, walking, talking, sleeping, and doing everything. In terms of eating, how a Muslim is going to eat for the sake of Allah is that, there are different types of foods. You want to eat rice, you want to eat that, this or that. It is delicious. You want to eat and continue eating until you fall asleep. That's not how a Muslim eats. A Muslim should eat for the sake of Allah in two ways. I'm going to explain. The first way is don't eat more than what you need. Don't eat more than what you need. It is an act of worship, because Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam taught us to eat one third. To eat what? 1/3. To divide the food, to eat 1/3. If you have to eat 1/3, definitely you know what I'm talking about. Most of us don't eat 1/3. So that is the first part of the eating for the sake of Allah. As a Muslim, you have to eat 1/3. Eat just 1/3. If you eat 1/3, 1/3 is okay for you to fill your belly for a particular time before you might be hungry again and go and look for another food to eat. With us, we have a problem. Once you see a plate of food, or if a food is delicious, what we do is we start eating until we fall asleep, until we doze off. That's when we feel it's now okay for me. That's not meant to be. A Muslim eats 1/3. You fetch what you can eat. You don't eat and keep eating and eating and eating until you fall asleep. That's not a Muslim. You just have to eat 1/3 because that is what you need. That is what is necessary. There's a difference between what you need and what you want. What you need it. It is important for that moment. If you are hungry, you need food. If you are not hungry because you see something sweet, you don't need it. You just want to take ice cream. You just want to take ice cream or to take juice. You just want it, not need it. If you haven't eaten for the past 12 hours, now you need food. That's when you have to eat 1/3. The second part of the eating is not to be extravagant. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, Kulu washrabu wala tusrifu innahu la yuhibbul musrifin. Eat and drink and don't be extravagant because Allah doesn't love those who are extravagant. So the first part is to eat what you need, to eat 1/3. The second part is to not to waste. So definitely they all walk hand in hand. If you have to eat 1/3, definitely you wouldn't waste. If you eat 1/3, definitely you wouldn't waste. So the first is to eat 1/3. The second is to not to waste. Kulu washrabu wala tusrifu innahu la yuhibbul musrifin. Eat and drink and don't waste because Allah doesn't love those who waste. May Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala grant us the ability to practice that. How would you now walk for the sake of Allah? How would you walk for the sake of Allah? I'm going to tell you everything you need to know. Inshallah, everything you need to know in terms of doing everything for the sake of Allah. I talked about eating, now I want to talk about walking for the sake of Allah. How do you walk for the sake of Allah? As a Muslim, there is something known as lowering the gaze. Lowering the gaze. Lowering the gaze. What is the meaning of lowering the gaze? As a Muslim, you don't just walk and keep on looking here and there. Here and there you are looking here and there, here and there. You have to lower your gaze, your eyes, you have to lower them as you walk. And that's why sometimes, may Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala forgive us, you see a person who is married, he doesn't know how to control his eyes. Every time he goes out, he keeps on looking here and there. He looks here, he looks there. He looks here, he looks there. So when he looks at every lady on the street or every woman on the street, he now becomes unsatisfied with what he has, meaning his wife. He's unsatisfied with her because he keeps on looking here and there, and when he sees a lady, he thinks this one is better than what he has. A Muslim is meant to lower his gaze. كل المؤمنين يغضوا من أبصارهم ويحفظوا فروجهم. Tell the believers to lower their gaze, to lower their gazes and guard their private parts. It is an act of worship for a believer to lower his or her gaze. Even the females have to lower their gaze. So you see, now I've talked about eating and now I'm talking about walking. So as a Muslim, you have to walk in such a way that you lower your eyes, your gaze. You don't just keep on looking here and there. The third part of sleeping for the sake of Allah. How do you sleep for the sake of Allah? When the Prophet ﷺ taught us to sleep on the right hand side, to sleep on the right hand side when you sleep, that is also sleeping for the sake of Allah. Sleeping on the right hand side, sleeping for the sake of Allah. In fact, this sleeping for the sake of Allah, I'm going to divide it into three. And the first is to sleep on the right hand side. In fact, medically, it has been proven that sleeping on the right hand side increases one's health. Because when you sleep on the right hand side, automatically your heart is above the lung, and it has been proven medically that it is better for one's heart to be above the lung rather than the lung being above the heart. So when you sleep like this, here is the heart, you sleep on the right hand side, automatically the heart is going to be above the lung. That's the first part of it. The second part, sleeping for the sake of Allah, is to sleep on time. To sleep on time. Because also it has been proven medically that when someone sleeps on time, it increases one's health to sleep on time. Although there might be certain situations whereby someone has to wake up in the middle of the night to do something, or to pray tahajjud, or perhaps someone has a planning or a timing that he has to be awake from 8 p.m. till perhaps 2 a.m. or 3 a.m. No, 3 a.m. From 8 p.m. to, let's say, 2 a.m. It depends, but medically it is advisable for one to sleep early. There might be situations whereby maybe once or twice in a week you are awake till maybe 2 a.m. Okay, you might have your own reason. So that's the second part. The first part is to sleep on the right hand side. The second part is to sleep early. The third part, sleeping for the sake of Allah, is to believe that if you sleep early, it would increase your health, and before you sleep, you have to pray, to say the dua, to pray, to say the dua. If you say the dua before you sleep, it is an act of worship. It is the teaching of the Rasul for a Muslim to say the dua before he sleeps, before he or she sleeps. It is an act of worship to say the dua. That is the third part. So the first part, to sleep early, to sleep on the right hand side, to sleep on the right hand side. The second part is to sleep early. The third part is to pray before sleeping, to say the dua before sleeping. The next thing in terms of doing something or doing absolutely everything for the sake of Allah, the third is I've talked about eating, I've talked about sleeping, I've talked about walking. Now, talking for the sake of Allah. How would a Muslim talk for the sake of Allah? A Muslim doesn't lie. A Muslim doesn't gossip. A Muslim doesn't slander. A Muslim doesn't backbite. A Muslim is not a person who swears or insults one another. Muslim, you don't lie, you don't gossip, you don't slander, you don't backbite, you don't swear or abuse. It isn't meant to be from amongst the qualities of a Muslim. So in terms of talking, you see this tongue that we have is very small in terms of its shape, but wallahi, the types of problems it can cause is unlimited. The tongue is such that it is small in shape, but in terms of the power it has, in terms of causing different problems, wallahi, it has a very big. In nature, in terms of causing problems, it is very large, but in terms of shape, it is very small. So we see this mouth, this tongue that we have. In terms of talking, we have to talk for the sake of Allah, to abstain from lying, to abstain from swearing, to abstain from abusing, to abstain from gossiping, to abstain from backbiting, to abstain from slandering. That is talking for the sake of Allah. A Muslim doesn't talk unnecessarily. It is amongst from the teachings of the Rasul that a Muslim doesn't talk unnecessarily. A Muslim only talks when it is necessary. So a Muslim talks only when it is necessary. And one thing about talking unnecessarily is if it becomes your habit to talk unnecessarily, you might end up gossiping. Because when you meet your friends and you start talking, you talk for perhaps 5 to 10 minutes. The 15th minute, the 15th minute, you don't have anything else to say, so you have to end up you have to start gossiping. So that is all about talking for the sake of Allah. Not to lie, to deceive, to decept, to cheat, to slander, to backbite, to gossip, to swear or abuse. A Muslim doesn't do all that I've mentioned. So talk for the sake of Allah. Talk only when it is necessary. That is talking for the sake of Allah. The next thing I've talked about talking for the sake of Allah, walking for the sake of Allah, eating for the sake of Allah, sleeping for the sake of Allah. Now, how do you pray to pray for the sake of Allah? Have I talked about praying for the sake of Allah? How do you pray for the sake of Allah? As Muslims, we have the 5 daily salah compulsory upon us. It is compulsory upon every Muslim to fulfill their 5 daily salah. Fajr, Dhuhr, Asr, Maghrib, and Isha. Fajr, Dhuhr, Asr, Maghrib, and Isha. 5 daily salah compulsory upon every Muslim. So, as a Muslim, you have to pray your 5 daily salah for the sake of Allah. When you wake up for Salatul Fajr, you go to the mosque for the sake of Allah, not because people would praise you. And that's what people are misunderstanding. Everything you do should be for the sake of the Almighty and not for the sake of someone that is going to praise you. So you read your 5 daily salah, it should be for the sake of Allah. Because wallahi, when you value your salah, you become closer to your maker. That's when you become closer to Allah. That's when you become closer to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. That 5 daily salah, at least if you are a Muslim and you don't have anything to do during the day, at least if you fulfill that 5 daily salah, at least you have something to do. At least 5 daily salah, you now have something to do. At least you have something to do that would link you with your maker, rather than to spend the whole day doing nothing. So the 5 daily salah is compulsory. It is an act of worship for you to pray those 5 daily salah. It is an act of worship to pray them, and wallahi, if you value them, you would become closer to your maker. Have I really touched how you should pray for the sake of Allah? One way of praying for the sake of Allah is to pray with humility, to pray with obedience. وَقُومُوا لِلَّهِ قَانِتِينَ, and stand for the sake of Allah with total humility, obedience, conviction, total humility, obedience, and conviction in Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Obedience and humility for the sake of Allah. Pray for the sake of Allah. People sometimes don't want to pray. People sometimes only pray because people are there to watch over them praying. If you pray, you are doing yourself good and not Allah. Allah doesn't need you to pray. If you pray, it is for your own good, because even when you are praying, one of the moments a believer is closest to his maker is when the believer is in sujood. That sujood, it's when you are closer to Allah, when you are closest to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. When you are in sujood, whilst you are in sujood, you fall prostrate for the sake of Allah, then you are close to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So you read your salah for His sake, for the sake of Allah, and not for the sake of anyone that's going to praise you. May Allah grant us the ability to read our salah for His sake. Another thing we can involve in for the sake of Allah is reciting the Quran for the sake of Allah. Valuing the Quran and reciting the Quran for the sake of Allah. The Quran is a blessed book for us. As Muslims, we are very blessed to have the Quran. Wallahi, it is a gift. Wallahi, it is a blessing. Wallahi, it is a gift for us to have the Quran. The Quran that we have is a key to success. It is a key to solving all our problems. We are very fortunate to have this Quran. Inna Allah yarfa'u bihadha al-kitab aqwaman wa yada'u bi akhirin. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala elevates certain people through the Quran, and through the same Quran He drops certain people. Upon what would Allah elevate you through the Quran? Why would Allah elevate you through the Quran? Allah would only elevate you through the Quran if you valued the Quran and you knew how important the Quran is to you, and that's only when Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala would elevate you through the Quran. May Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala elevate us through the Quran. The second hadith, Al-Qur'anu hujjatul laka aw alayk. The Quran is going to bear witness either for you or against you. Upon what would the Quran bear witness for you or against you on the day of judgment? The Quran would only bear witness for you on the day of judgment if you valued it and you know how important it is to you. That's only when the Quran would bear witness for you. Today people want to be hypocritic. People want to only recite the Quran with melody when they are in front of people, when people are watching them. Like I always say, and I'm repeating this, everything we do should be for the sake of Allah. Everything we do should be for the sake of Allah. We should know that Allah is watching us. Allah sees us. Allah is watching us and Allah is seeing us. Anywhere you are, Allah is seeing you. If you like, you hide. If you like, you stay in the open. If you like, you enter under the ground. If you like, you do anything, you hide under the blanket. Allah sees you. Everything you do, Allah is seeing you. So everything we do, we should try to do everything for the sake of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. We should try to do everything for the sake of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. If you recite the Quran, it should be for the sake of Allah. The hadith says, Iqra warattil, Iqra warattil kama kunta turattilu fi dunya. Read and keep on going up. Read and keep on going up. Keep on reciting. Keep on going up. You read the first verse, you keep on going up. Continue reading. You say Alhamdulillahi Rabbil Alameen. Or continue Ar-Rahmanir Rahim Maliki Yawmiddin Iyyaka na'budu wa iyyaka nasta'in. Read and keep on going up. Continue reading. Kama kunta turattilu fi dunya. Just like you used to recite whilst you were in the earth. So if you used to recite the Quran whilst you were in the dunya with melody, with a good recitation, On the day of judgment, you would only be able to recite the Quran the way you used to when you were in this dunya. We have to know this. It is very important for us to realize and understand that it is very good and it is an act of worship to do everything for the sake of Allah. My beloved brothers and sisters, I think we have talked a lot. From the time in here, I can see 25 minutes. 25 minutes, 28 seconds. This is a long talk. It is a long talk. So I think we can stop here for now. We have talked about doing everything for the sake of Allah, eating for the sake of Allah, talking for the sake of Allah, working for the sake of Allah, sleeping for the sake of Allah, sleeping for the sake of Allah, reciting the Quran for the sake of Allah. May Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala grant us the ability to do everything for His sake. Assalamu alaikum.